Hello YouTube, welcome to another tutorial video. In today's video we're going to be deconstructing a jam. In particular, it's the jam I uploaded to YouTube previously. If you haven't seen that, please check it out. I will post a link in the description below. Now, this video is going to be sort of following on from the last one that I did, which was about my setup, how everything's connected, audio tracks, MIDI tracks, and all the cabling and all that good stuff. Now, this video is going to be focusing mainly on the Octatrack, and that's because the Octatrack is the sort of brain of the studio. We're going to be looking at the individual MIDI parts, the audio parts, the scenes, and then we're going to sort of listen to the individual sounds, and then you'll hear how they all fit together. We'll look at patterns, parts, stuff like that. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. I thought first maybe we just have a listen to a part of the jam so you can hear what the whole thing sounds like, and then we'll get into deconstructing bits and then finally put it all back together. Here's what it sounds like. So basically it's a 4-bar loop. But how's that set up? Let's have a look at the patterns. So, for this particular track I'm using 4 patterns. They're on 5, 6, 7 and 8. And I usually start with, progress them through as I'm playing the track. So I'm not really using the arranger. I'm just manually switching patterns as I play the track. So I'll start with 5, work my way through 6, 7 and 8. And sometimes back and forth. So let's start off by muting all the instruments and then going through firstly the MIDI tracks. Right, so let's mute everything and go through the MIDI tracks. So the first track is the Korg Volca keys, and that sounds like this. So it's kind of a pad sound, and I'm using the LFO on the Korg Volca keys to modulate the filter. It's quite a slow modulation, so at parts it'll be quite quiet and then it gets a little bit louder. Okay. Second track, Korg Volca bass. It's kind of like a stabby sound, as you can hear. And again, I'm using the LFO on the Korg Volca bass to modulate the filter. It's a slow LFO, so and slow LFOs are quite sort of useful to add progressive movement through a song. You'll see that as a theme through a lot of the stuff that I do. I like to use LFOs to modulate sounds. Okay, the next sound is the bass line. This one's coming from the Roland SEO2, my new favorite bass synth. Not a lot in the way of modulation going on this track. It's just a nice, deep, meaty bass. Okay, on track 12 we have nothing. This is usually routed to the TR8. This is not used in this track. So the next one is the Roland System 1. This is the lead sound. Kind of a blippy type of lead sound. And I like to manually modulate the effects, the reverb and the delay. Next is the JU06 Boutique. This one's running through the Strymon Blue Sky, and again I like to manually modulate the delay on the decay time on the reverb. Okay, that's it for the MIDI parts. Let's now look at the audio parts. So, part 1 has, track 1 has a drum loop. This drum loop is effectively, it's sampled from the TR8, It's a kick, hats, clap and a clav. And on that channel I've got some effects. Let's have a look at that. We've got a filter and we've got a reverb. Moving on to the next track, it's a percussion track. And on that track we also have a filter and a reverb. Moving on, shaker track. This one has a filter again and a reverb. See a pattern forming? There's a reason for that, and we'll get to that when we look at scenes. This next track is a series of whoosh effects that I use to emphasize the first beat of the bar as the track loops. Bit of an interesting one, this. You'll hear the sound keeps changing every 4 bars. And there's a clever little trick that I learned from reading on the internet on how you do that. So let's have a look at the setup of that particular audio sample. So you'll notice there are 4 different sounds, which you can see if I hold it still there, and they're sliced so that each slice is one of the sounds. And if you look carefully, you'll notice every time it plays, it's playing a different one. So basically how that's done is you slice it up, as you see there, and then you place a trig on the first slot of the track. So if we just exit here, go into pat mode, you can see there's one trig here. Okay, and then what I'm doing is I'm using, let's just exit there, I'm using the LFO to modulate the start parameter of the trig, and it's using a random wave. So basically what that's doing is it's randomly choosing which slice to play every time it comes around. Okay, let's come out of that, and now we will mute this part. And the next one is the vocal. So kind of a funky loop of some guy going down down down, which was the name of the track. This one has a filter and some lo-fi effects. Okay, track 6 and 7 are trig tracks, so when I unmute them you're not hearing them. That's because they're set up in a sort of special way. Let me just stop the sequencer and show you how those are set up. So if we go to track mode, what you'll see is the sequencer isn't running, but I can trig the track and it will start playing. As you can see, there it goes, and then it stops. So how does that work? So let's first look at track 6, and first we'll look at the actual sounds. So this one is very similar to the sounds I had on track 4. They're sort of whoosh sounds, and you'll see again there's a series of them and they're sliced up. Once again, I've got an LFO modulating the start parameter with a random wave, which again means it's going to trig a different sound every time it plays, and it's going to be random. But what I've got going on in the pattern settings, so function bank looks at the pattern settings, and if we look at track 6 and 7, you'll see they're set up to play free. They're one-shot tracks and they're quantized to the track length. So what that means is they'll play free of the sequencer, so they'll only play when you trig them. It's a one-shot track, that means it'll only play once and then stop. And the trig quantize is important because what that means is it will always start on time. So you can trig it at any point in time during the loop and then it'll only start when the pattern restarts. Pattern, so let's just hear if we can hear what that sounds like. I need to unmute them. So you can hear it's a whoosh sound. Exit, and again if I trig it, you'll hear a different whoosh sound. One more time, just for good measure. Okay. So track 7 is a similar sort of thing, except it's a snare build-up. So these are two sounds that will only trig only play when I manually trig them, and it's a great way to do build-ups. You know, get some sort of random sounds going on, and it works good for transitions between patterns. Okay, that's the audio and the MIDI tracks. Now let's look at the scenes. So back to track 1, and what I like to do with scenes is I like to, on scene A, I like to have scenes that bring in and take out parts. So if we just start off the sequencer and unmute the first track, so go here and let's unmute a few more tracks so you can really hear what's going on here. Okay, so you can see scene 1 has basically just the drum loop playing. Scene 2 introduces the percussion, and scene 3 introduces the shaker. Okay, moving over here, scene 9 has reverb, automated, and filtering. Great for build-ups again. This one has some filtering, more filtering and a little bit of reversing, more filtering, and completely removing the drums. That was done using the amp page and the volume. If we bring in the vocal, you'll hear some more interesting stuff with the scenes. Okay. This one doesn't have much on the vocal. This one has re-triggering on the vocal. This one has reverse effect on the vocal. And this one has a lo-fi effect on the vocal. Okay, let's bring all the MIDI parts back in. And hear everything together. Okay, let's take a quick look at the pattern setup for this track. So, as I said before, I'm using 4 patterns for this track. And I've sort of progressed through the patterns and mix them up. I'm not using the arranger, so everything is sort of manually moving between patterns. And why there's 4 patterns instead of trying to do everything off one is generally just so that I can affect the MIDI tracks, variations on the MIDI, mutes on the MIDI. So because you can't use scenes with MIDI, which just, I so wish that was a feature, but I guess that's never going to happen. You got to learn ways around that, and basically I use patterns to bring in parts of the MIDI parts, take them out and vary them. So if we go to the first pattern, you'll notice no bass line. The second pattern brings in the bass line. You'll also hear those trig tracks. The next pattern, let's trig one of those tracks again to show you how a transition is possible. So you can see I used the trig track there to trig the drum build-up, the snare build-up, and then used a scene to fade out some of the drums, add some reverb, and then bring it all back in as soon as the next pattern loops. So this pattern's got the lead in it, and it's got a variation on some of the vocals and a slight variation on the bass. The next pattern has everything all together. And then it's just a matter of playing around with the scenes and the patterns to make things interesting. There we go. That is how I jam. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe for more. Thanks a lot and cheers.